I am Brooke, 34, female. I live alone in a high-end loft in Charlotte, North Carolina. For the last 6 years, I've worked as a senior UX architect for a major tech firm, a job that allows me to work from home, where I am surrounded by the comforting silence of design systems and clean code. My life is a carefully curated ecosystem of order and predictability, a stark contrast to the chaotic family I grew up in. Welcome to Narratives by Nora. Driving along today, Brooke's story makes me think about building peace when we come from chaos. While on the road, let me know your location and local time. I will read every comment once I pull over. But for Brooke, that hard-won silence was about to be shattered. I did not cry when the ink hit the paper. I did not hesitate. Anger was not loud this time. It was clinical. I sat in a sleek, glass-walled office in downtown Charlotte, the air smelling of expensive leather and filtered silence. My lawyer, Millie, sat across from me, pushing the final stack of documents toward my hand. The number at the top of the closing statement was clear, $550,000. That was the market value of my loft. That was the price of my sanctuary. But more importantly, it was the price of my exit strategy. Most people would think selling your home in total secrecy is an act of desperation. I instructed Millie to facilitate a private pocket listing, marketing the property only to vetted cash buyers. This ensured no for sale signs appeared on my lawn, and more importantly, no automated price drop alerts ever reached my mother's Zillow feed. For me, it was a data-driven solution to an emotional liability. My parents, Stephanie and Gary, and my brother, Adam, did not see my home as my property. They saw it as a family asset, an emergency resource, a subscription they had been using for years without ever paying the bill. I knew that a simple no would not stop them. In their world, my boundaries were just suggestions. No was merely the start of a negotiation. If I said I did not want Adam moving in, they would counter with just for 3 months, or he will stay out of your way. They would use every trick in the book, guilt, tears, and accusations of selfishness until I caved. They had spent decades mistaking my patience for permission and my silence for weakness. So I decided to create a reality they could not argue with. You cannot negotiate with a signature on a deed. You cannot guilt trip a new owner who has already paid $500,000 to have you removed. I picked up the heavy fountain pen. My hand was steady, calm, factual, and lethal. As I signed my name for the final time, I felt a chain snap. I was not just signing away a piece of real estate. I was signing away the role of the family support beam. I was liquidating my ties to a parasitic system that had been draining me for over half a decade. Millie watched me, her expression professional but supportive. She knew the history. She knew about the $210,000 I had already invested in my brother's delusions. She knew that my loft was the final frontier. "It is done," she said, pulling the papers back into her folder. "The sale is final. The keys transfer Monday morning." I looked out the window at the Charlotte skyline. For the first time in my life, I was technically homeless, but I had never felt more secure. Millie had already coordinated with my bank to clear the large international wire transfer, ensuring all anti-money laundering protocols were satisfied, so my funds would be waiting for me the moment I touched down in Europe. My assets were liquid. My address was about to become a ghost. And my family? They were still operating on an old blueprint, planning a move into a house that did not belong to me anymore. I did not answer the 3 missed calls from my mother that popped up on my screen as I left the office. I went back to my laptop and opened a new spreadsheet. This was not a breakdown, it was a balance sheet. And for the first time in 34 years, the math was finally in my favor. Every Sunday, the scene was the same. The dining room would be filled with the heavy, cloying scent of honey-glazed ham and the sound of my father, Gary, praising my brother's latest disruption. Adam, 30 years old, and perpetually between major breakthroughs, would lean back with a smug grin, while my mother, Stephanie, fussed over his plate as if he were a conquering hero returning from war. I sat there, 34 years old, the senior UX architect who had actually built a life from nothing, feeling like a ghost at my own table. In my family, roles were not just assigned. They were a contract I never signed. Adam's dreams were considered investments, while my stability was merely an expectation. When I graduated with honors, it was, "That is nice, dear." When I landed my first 6-figure salary, it was, "Good, now you can help your brother with his car repairs." The math of my betrayal is documented in 5 years of bank transfers, $210,000. That number represents a 6-year slow bleed of my quarterly bonuses and tech stock options liquidated funds I should have been saving for my own retirement, but instead used to fuel Adam's failed crypto ventures and relaunch phases. Every time he crashed, the frantic call would come from my mother, not him. She would tell me that family comes first, that I had so much and he had so little. My compassion was not a gift to them. It was a luxury they had been overdrafting for years until the account was finally empty. You might ask why I stayed, why I kept writing those checks and swallowing my resentment while they treated my achievements like a footnote in the story of Adam's life. It was not weakness. It was a prison without bars. I was caught in the invisible chain of a survivor. I had been parentified so early that I genuinely believed I was the family's permanent safety net, the only thing keeping the roof from caving in. I thought if I was just helpful enough, they would eventually see me. They would see Brooke, the daughter, not just Brooke, the cash cow. But at those ham dinners, surrounded by their laughter and my own silence, I realized that my value to them was entirely transactional. I was the host, and they were the parasites who had moved into my bloodstream. The wall between us had been built brick by brick, check by check. And that Sunday, as the smell of honey and mustard drifted through the house, I realized it was time to tear the whole structure down. The Sunday dinner started with a carefully constructed illusion of normalcy. The table was set with the good china, and my mother, Stephanie, brought out the glazed ham with a smile that was just a bit too bright. My father, Gary, was nodding along to Adam's latest lecture on decentralized finance and synergy, looking like a quiet, passive king in a kingdom where his son was the crowned prince. I knew the pattern. This was the opening act, the standard warm-up before the real negotiation began. Then Stephanie placed her napkin on her lap and leaned in. Well, with all this change, we have come up with the perfect solution to help Adam get back on his feet, she announced. She looked at me as if she were offering me a magnificent gift. Since you have that spare bedroom in your loft and you work from home anyway, it is sorted. Adam is moving into your place. She clapped her hands lightly, the matter already decided in her mind. She told me it would only be for 6, maybe 8 months at the most. I felt the air leave my lungs. I looked at Gary, who was meticulously cutting his meat, avoiding my eyes. Adam just gave me a lazy, expectant smirk. He genuinely believed my home was his due. You are joking, right? I managed to whisper. But Stephanie's smile did not waver. She told me not to be dramatic. She called it the logical solution and argued that because I had a perfectly good room sitting empty, it was my turn to step up and support him. When I pointed out that the room was not empty, that it was my office, the space where I earned the money to pay for that very loft, she waved her hand dismissively. She told me I could just work at the kitchen table. My father finally chimed in, saying that they were retired and needed their peace and quiet. The hypocrisy was staggering. They had spent 30 years cultivating this entitlement, and now that it was an inconvenience to them, they were outsourcing the responsibility to me. I was being informed of my new obligation, not asked for a favor. Adam leaned forward, his voice dripping with condescension. Come on, Brooke. Do not be so selfish. It is a huge place for one person. It will be fun. He envisioned a life where I worked, while he slept in, ate my food, and treated my sanctuary like a free boarding house. Then he hit me with the final brick in the wall. Hey, do you still have that 50-inch television, he asked, thinking it would be better in the living room for my office than my old one? You cool with that? He was not even moved in yet, and he was already rearranging my furniture and claiming my possessions. That sheer, unadulterated entitlement was what finally replaced my dread with a cold, hard resolve. I realized then that as long as I owned that loft, it would never truly be mine. It would always be their backup plan. My parents had mistaken my patience for permission, and it was time to show them how wrong they were. The next morning, the campaign began with the efficiency of a hostile takeover. My mother, Stephanie, texted me a photo of a desk she had seen online, asking if it would be perfect for Adam's new room. She was not asking how I felt. She was already decorating my home for its new inhabitant. I did not reply. Instead, I went into my phone settings and created a custom filter. All calls and texts from my mother, my father, and Adam were silenced. The immediate silence was intoxicating. It was like a heavy background noise I had endured for years had suddenly been switched off. Then I tackled the physical front. Adam's leftover hobby equipment in my spare room had to go. I spent the afternoon hauling the bulky high-end server racks, the dusty turntables, and the paint-stained easel out to the garage. I posted them on a local marketplace for free with a single requirement: must pick up today. Within 2 hours, a parade of grateful strangers had cleared out every last trace of his transient ambitions. As an art student gleefully loaded the easel into her car, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I was reclaiming my space, 1 square foot at a time. The following week was a whirlwind of calculated, clandestine activity. While my family was likely stewing in their silent, manipulative standoff, expecting me to come crawling back, I was mobilizing. I had to dismantle my life in secret. I could not rent a large moving truck without raising suspicion from the neighbors. So I operated like a spy moving sensitive intelligence. Late each evening, I loaded my car with boxes of clothes, books, and personal items, ferrying them to a small storage unit I had rented across town. Each box I packed felt like shedding a layer of a life that was never truly mine. I found old birthday cards with generic verses and $5 bills reminders that I was perpetually a child in their eyes. I did not feel sentimental. I felt detached. I sold my large furniture online for low prices, provided they were picked up immediately. My loft began to echo, feeling less like a home and more like a transition point. During this time, I found a new sanctuary, a modern one-bedroom apartment in a secure building with a balcony overlooking a park. It was a place they had never seen, in a neighborhood they never visited. It was a blank slate. I signed the lease and set the move-in date for the day after the house sale closed. My friend Millie was my only anchor. They expect you to break, she warned me during one of our nightly check-ins. They think this silence is a punishment you cannot handle. They had no idea that their silence was the greatest gift they could have given me. It gave me the room to disappear. 2 days before the final dinner, Millie called me back to her office. She had a file open on her desk, the results from the forensic accountant we hired to audit the family's financial history. I sat down, smoothing my skirt, my mind already running the numbers. I did not look for an apology in her eyes. I looked for data. "Brooke," she said, her voice dropping an octave, "we started this to track your $210,000, but the digital trail led us into your parents' private accounts. We found something much worse. The high-end computer I had bought for Adam, the one he claimed was an essential tool for his graphic design career, had not been used for art. It had been used for unauthorized access. Using the home network, Adam had been systematically hacking into Stephanie and Gary's high-yield retirement accounts. He hadn't just used the network. He had exploited their trust during tech support sessions to add his own burner phone as a secondary 2FA, two-factor authentication contact, intercepting the security codes before they ever reached my parents' devices. He was not just a failure, he was a predator. I looked at the forensic report, and I did not feel a rush of shock. I did not gasp. I felt the kind of satisfaction you feel when a complex piece of code finally executes without errors. The family dynamic was not a tragedy, it was a scam. I had been footing the bill for the hardware that was currently destroying our parents' financial future. It was the ultimate double standard. They were demanding my $550,000 loft for his headquarters, while he was already liquidating their life savings from his bedroom. My father's quiet king routine and my mother's retired nurse persona were just the backdrop for the monster they had raised in their own basement. This was the kill shot. It removed any lingering shred of familial obligation I might have had. My parents were not just enabling a dreamer, they were protecting a thief. The rotten structure of our family was not my burden to fix anymore. It was an accounting error that was about to be corrected. I started thinking about love in terms of a contract. For years, I had signed every rider, accepted every late fee, and never questioned the rising cost of my membership in this family. Now I realized it had been a subscription with me footing the entire bill. My compassion had been a luxury resource they'd overdrafted for years, and Adam was the one spending the interest. Seeing the signature mismatches on the withdrawal slips did not break my heart. It balanced my books. "Does this change your plan?" Millie asked, watching me closely. I stood up and picked up my purse, my movements clinical and precise. I did not need to think about it. "No," I said, "it just makes the final dinner much more interesting. Inside, my mind was glowing with a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of facts, numbers, and the absolute certainty that the subscription was officially canceled. I walked into my parents' house for what I knew would be the last time. The smell of honey-glazed ham was thick enough to choke on a sensory anchor to a dynamic I was about to incinerate. My sudden appearance, after nearly 3 weeks of silence, was exactly the white flag they were expecting. I could see the smug satisfaction on Stephanie's face as she wiped her hands on her apron. She thought I was there to capitulate, to finally fall back into my role as the family's structural support beam. We moved to the dining room, the air thick with the unspoken tension of a negotiation they thought they had already won. I ate my food slowly, methodically, letting them sit in the silence. It was Gary who finally cracked first, clearing his throat as if to reassert his position as the king of a crumbling castle. "So, Brooke," he said, "what is this problem you mentioned?" Stephanie did not even let me answer. She leaned in, her voice dripping with faux sweetness, as she told me that Adam moving in was sorted, that he needed a stable environment, and that providing it was what a good sister does. I did not argue. I did not get emotional. I just gave a small, polite nod that they mistook for surrender. "I understand your position completely," I said, my voice level and clinical. "And you are right. He can certainly move in." I paused just long enough to see the triumphant smiles bloom on their faces. Then I delivered the final line. "Sure, if the new owners do not mind the silence." Gary froze mid-bite, a fork full of mashed potatoes hovering halfway to his mouth in utter shock. The mask of disbelief on Stephanie's face was absolute as she shrieked, asking what owners I was talking about. I explained the math to them as if I were presenting a quarterly report. I told them the sale of my loft had closed on Friday for $550,000. I told them I had moved all my things into a secret storage unit yesterday and that the new owners, a young couple expecting their first child, would be getting the keys tomorrow morning. I suggested that if Adam wanted to move in, he would have to take it up with them, though they were planning on turning his headquarters into a nursery. The detonation was bigger than I'd imagined. Stephanie shot to her feet, her chair screaming against the floor as she cried about sacrifice and betrayal. Adam yelled that I was selfish, but his anger had no leverage anymore. I realized then that their authority had always been a performance, the power illusion of an empty wallet. Their control over me was a luxury they had rented with my own hard-earned resources, and now that the money was gone, their authority was just a hollow shell. Gary asked where I was living, his voice weak and diminished. I told him that I had an apartment, but he had lost the privilege of knowing the address. I informed them that no key would ever be made for them, and that they would never find their way into my new sanctuary. I stood up, feeling the kind of clarity that only comes when a toxic blueprint is finally shredded. "I hope you have room in the basement, Mom," I said as I walked toward the door, "because it looks like Adam is moving back home." I walked out into the cool Charlotte night and did not look back at the wreckage I left behind. Weeks of peace have slowly turned into months. Now, with my Italian elective residency visa officially stamped and my remote contract solidified, I sit in a sun-drenched cafe in Florence where the air smells of old stone and fresh-pressed espresso. It is a world away from the heavy, cloying scent of honey-glazed ham and the suffocating expectations of my old life. I spend my mornings watching the world go by, realizing that for the first time in 34 years, I am no longer living in relation to someone else's crisis. My address is a secret, my phone is quiet, and the proceeds from the loft sale cleared of all capital gains tax and final HOA assessments sit in a high-yield account. A quiet, powerful testament to my total independence. Last night, a notification popped up on my screen that would have once sent my heart into a panic. It was an email from my father, Gary. The subject line was just my name, Brooke. I did not feel a rush of adrenaline or a wave of anxiety. I felt nothing at all. He did not apologize for the 3 decades of dismissal. He did not acknowledge the $210,000 I had sacrificed to bail out a predator. He certainly did not mention that Adam had been hacking their own retirement funds. Instead, it was a short, pathetic attempt to lay a new hook at my door. He wrote that my mother was struggling and that things were not easy, with Adam still living in their basement. He ended it by saying he hoped I was well. The old Brooke, the support beam, who craved even a crumb of their approval, would have replied. I would have called, offered to mediate, and been drawn right back into the vortex of their rot. But I looked at his words and recognized them for what they truly were, a test to see if the old dynamic could be reestablished. I did not type a single letter in response. I selected the email and moved it to the trash with clinical precision. I chose to be free. I chose the sound of silence. I have come to realize that in many families, roles are not just assigned, they are enforced. If you are the reliable one, the one who plans and saves and sacrifices, they will never see your success as an achievement. They will see it as a resource to be exploited. I spent years thinking my patience was a virtue, but I finally learned it was just a deposit on a future of larger demands. Forgiveness is not always for the other person. Sometimes it is the act of liquidating the emotional debt that keeps you anchored to someone else's failure. If you find yourself in a similar situation, being used as the host for people who only love your utility, remember this: your life is not a subsidiary of a family corporation. You are the sole architect of your future, and you have every right to build your sanctuary somewhere they can never find the key. Cutting toxic ties is not an act of cruelty, it is an act of survival. If you have ever been the one expected to carry the weight of a golden child, let me know your story in the comments. Do not forget to share this if you are ready to build your own sanctuary.